At what moment in your life did you stop, chuckle, and think to yourself, I'm in danger? I swam from the beach out to a buoy, not even that far, maybe 200 meters from the beach. I'm a strong swimmer, so I thought I'd manage it easily. Something about the cold water and current, I don't know, I was really struggling coming back even when trying to swim horizontally to the beach, etc. Went all lightheaded and felt really tired and just started thinking that this was it. I was going to drown and how stupid it was of me. Floated there for a bit and laughed to myself like a maniac about how stupid I was passing away like this. Eventually snapped out of it and started swimming again and ended up crawling back onto the beach. My partner asked how sea was and I just croaked, fine. We went from strong swimmer to negotiating with the ocean gods real quick, huh? Story 2. At my best friend's going away party. Hammered than I've ever been before or since. Barely able to stand when the bros collectively decided to pick me up and throw me in the pool. All I could do was grab a nearby screen door with one white-knuckled hand. Host is a big, burly musclehead who just made sergeant. Stopped them and told them they were idiots. I was too hammered to swim. Then I blacked out. Story 3. Me and my good friend Felix, both German, were traveling with an interrail ticket through Europe. In Serbia, we were in a train which was going really slow and stopping at every really little town or village. For some reason, the train got shorter and shorter every other station because they were uncoupling a wagon here and there. So everyone moved to the first 2 wagons because they were most likely to arrive at the final destination. Me and Felix have already been in the second first wagon in a closed cabin where there's a bench on the left and the right. We were both sitting left having a cigarette when suddenly things went intense. 3 obviously intoxicated men came into that cabin. At first they only asked for a cigarette, which we gave them. But after a few minutes they started discussing more and more intensely. I could feel that they were talking about us. So I asked Felix, whose father is Serbian, if he would understand them. He was pretty serious at that moment and told me that the 2 of them wanted to rob us now and one wanted to wait until after the train ride. Felix gave me continuous updates about what they were talking about. They were guessing how much money we might have and still discussing when to do the robbery. Their discussion heated up at one point and then stopped completely. I was wondering what happened and suddenly it all went black. We were in a freaking tunnel. I was totally flexed and expected to get roughened. They were only talking like 3 sentences. I asked Felix, are they going to do it now? He said, I'm not sure. After what felt like 10, probably was 2 minutes, the light came back and I was sitting there like freaking Jackie Chan on my bench, prepared to fight back in the dark. They knew now that we kind of knew. They decided to follow us to our destination so we could kind of chill during the ride. At our destination, we just sprinted into the next taxi and told him to get to the next city as fast as possible. Story 4. I was walking into my apartment building one day when I saw a guy start to walk into my apartment. I'd only been gone for like 5 minutes, so I yelled at him to get the heck out of my apartment. So this big Hispanic dude turns back towards me and says he's looking for so-and-so. I tell him he doesn't live here anymore, even though I occasionally get his junk mail. Dude tells me that he's fresh out of jail and this guy owes him money. I tell him that's fine, but he doesn't live here anymore. Dude tells me that my apartment looks like his and that if I'm covering for him, he'll be coming back. I tell the dude that's fine and I won't see him later because once again, he doesn't live here. Story 5. Calling an Uber in Houston right in the middle of a downpour. As a Brit who was staying there for work, I was only vaguely aware of the dangers of flash flooding, and being from a country with no real inclement weather, I obviously didn't take it as seriously as I should have. As Texas natives will no doubt confirm, when it rains hard. At least it did that morning. I remember trying to call an Uber on the app, and a few drivers in a row canceled on me. But I was going home from a friend's house, so I didn't really have much choice and just persisted in requesting a driver. The driver, who eventually did show up, was a friendly Nigerian fellow who probably also didn't really consider how dangerous it was. In the short, as in 4-second journey from the front door to the cab, I got so soaked it looked like I had been thrown in a lake. They were both chuckling like, look at this rain, until it got so bad that we literally couldn't see 1 yard in front of the car. At this point, we were on the freeway and basically trapped, and then we both started getting alerts in the Uber app that we were in a danger zone and to vacate immediately. Then we saw the water rising on the side of the freeway and cars starting to lose control. That's when both of our smiles dropped, and it was like, yeah, people pass away in these conditions. Both might not be going home today. It probably sounds silly to people who have to deal with that all the time, but that was the only time in my life I've experienced a genuine fear of there's a very real danger that I could either drown or be sleeping in a community center this evening. Eventually, he did get me home, and I've never been so grateful. He got a pretty big tip from me. And a hug. Story 6. My friend and I were scaling a cliff. He wanted to go around, which would take about an hour. I said we could climb it. Fast forward 10 minutes and I'm hanging off a cliff 30 feet tall and hanging on to dear life with 2 hands. I found the situation quite funny. I was so confident in my ability to climb and I lost my footing just as I got to the top. I was holding on the rock for what felt like forever, most likely less than 2 minutes until he managed to climb up and pull my back up there. Story 7. When I was in school and did my psych rotation, the first thing we were told was never to split up from our partner, so just in case of a dangerous situation with a patient, we would have a second person there to help. I went to do an assessment on the patient. He seemed perfectly normal, and my partner judged that now would be a good time to use the restroom. The patient and I are having a pleasant conversation. He asks me to look at his drawings, which he hung up proudly on the wall. I oblige. Not like art as much as the next gal. I look, they're plenty nice, and then I turn around and find that the second thing we were told never to do, which is to let the patient get between us and the doorway, has happened, and he was not seeming so friendly anymore. Which is when I thought to myself, well, darn it, I'm in a pickle now. This man is telling me how he has to get out of here. I have to help him, and I don't even hear what at this point because I'm realizing how potentially screwed I am. But then I realized that I also done the third thing which we were told never to do, which was to keep our cell phones on us on the floor. I was just hoping at this point that I could keep this guy talking a little while I called my preceptor to save my dumb self. My friend was at the same clinical site the following semester, and the preceptor used that as a cautionary tale to emphasize the first 2 rules and get rid of the third one. Story 8. I worked as an animator in a hotel. During the season in the mini club, daycare is filled with kids, but post-season there's not even one kid in the hotel. So post-season, one older lady and one middle-aged guy entered the empty daycare. The lady quickly explained to me that this guy is her mentally disabled son who is mentally around 3 to 4 years old. He saw the daycare and really wanted to play there. Usually I wouldn't accept, but there are no kids around, so I was actually happy that I'll be occupied for a while. It was really endearing, and we often watched Mickey Mouse DVDs since he was a big fan. After a few days of me hanging out with him, his mother came to pick him up and asked me how he was. I replied that he was nice as always, to which she replied, "Good, because he can get very violent and aggressive sometimes." It sent chills down my spine realizing that I was lucky, but that also will be coming to the mini club for the rest of their vacation. So there I was, day after day playing with this dude as big as me, completely alone, doing everything he wanted and being more than careful just so that he doesn't get mad. Story 9. A homeless girl grabbed me from a bar and said she needed an ambulance because her friend had coded. I followed her and started phoning one. She led me into an abandoned building. All that was going through my mind was, someone needs help. When she led me to some stairs and said we need to go up them, my brain finally kicked in and realized it could easily be a trap. Even if it wasn't, I was about to walk into a den and was far enough into the building where escape wasn't easy. Luckily, my friend had followed us in and appeared, so I phoned the ambulance and we left. Story 10. I was doing aid work in Croatia in the 90s, only a few years after the war had ended. Our group was staying in a small village about an hour outside Zagreb, which had been caught up in the conflict. Lots of shelled houses, mines in the countryside. Even the main bridge had been blown up, so residents had to use an army makeshift bridge if they wanted to cross the river. We made friends with the locals, and they took us down the river to where we had a fun time swimming and mucking about. I totally underestimated the river current and my ability to swim. To start trying to cross the river, and the current just picks me up. Whoosh, and suddenly I'm on my back, trying to swim against it. No deal. When I realized this, I started trying to get footing, but I'm being swept downstream and my feet are literally hitting rocks. No grip at all. It seemed like forever, but was probably about 5 to 10 seconds. I hit a shallow calm patch of the river where I could stand up. When the guys came over, they were telling me it was no big deal, but had I been swept a little bit further downstream, I would have hit a heavily mined area and probably been blown up to bits. I metaphorically crapped myself. That's the closest I've come to losing my life. Really messed me up. Story 11. I told the story before related to some army threats, but it was 3 years ago, I believe, when I was still in active service in Switzerland. I'm part of a tank crew. That day, I was the designated loader for the cannon. We were doing live fire exercises, and as we fired, one of the gas extractor seals blew up. What this basically is a circular rubber ring around the gas tube of the cannon. If you look up a Leopard A2 tank, it's a thick tube at the base of the cannon that acts as a seal to prevent smoke backlash into the crew compartment and instead vents it outside. This entailed the sealed crew compartment to fill up with smoke and the acrid smell of cordite and essentially blind us all. So here I am, a 25 kg high-X shell in my arms that you don't want to drop on the floor, blinded and winded by smoke, thinking, well, this is how I pass away, apparently. Managed to fumble around, slot the shell back into the carry tray as well as engage the coax machine gun fan. It's mounted under the machine gun ejection port and pulls the smoke outwards when turned on, and opened the top hatch to let it cycle out. Fun times. Story 12. Hunted wild boar, razorbacks in Australia. Since I was a teenager, 14, they wouldn't give me a weapon. They set a line of the teenagers up with long poles and what looked like metal trash can lids to bang and make noise in a line abreast formation. If you stomp forward, pigs run the other way toward the hunters with the weapons, in theory. Occasionally, a male, the ones with the horns, will have enough testosterone stored to charge at us. That's when we're supposed to take the pole and push them away. Yeah, a 14-year-old idiot me dressed in a leather apron is going to push this 400-pound angry pork monster off me with a stick. I bet the boars went home and bragged about how they terrorized a bunch of kids with metal lids. It's their version of a fishing story. Story 13. I took an out-of-bounds ski trail that looked fun. By myself, because intelligence is my strong suit. Came upon a tall cliff with a flat landing that I knew I couldn't ski on, but I had come too far to hike back to the main path. Took my skis off, tossed them over, and climbed down. Hurt my legs, but nothing serious. Continued on. Several minutes later, came upon a sign pointing towards a 20-kilometer bike trail ending God knows where. It was around that time I realized I could end up lost in the backcountry of a ski resort with no cell reception. Decided to hike in the opposite direction the sign was pointing since it was uphill and seemed more likely to take me back to the main trail. After several whispered swears and a good half hour of hiking uphill, and across a sketchy-looking wooden bridge, through deep snow and ski boots, holding my skis, I arrived at a populated ski run. I now make sure to have someone with me for all backcountry-related adventures. That way, if I pass away, I can bring them down with me. Story 14. To put a long story short, when I was 16, I severely misinterpreted how long a hiking trail was. I discovered it a couple hours before sunset. I had never hiked it before, so I glanced at the map at the trailhead before setting off. That was essentially a loop with a slash through it, so I wasn't too worried about getting lost. I hiked it for an hour or so. I reached what I thought was the halfway point and sat for a while. When I got up, I decided to hike the rest of the loop instead of going back the way I came. Bad idea. The sun was almost down at this point and I had to start using my phone as a flashlight. Then I realized that I'm at 15%. At that point, the reality set in that I was a 16-year-old girl alone in the woods. No one knew where I was, and I'm about to lose my only light source. As I continue hiking the loop, I start to realize that it's much longer than I initially thought. I started to get frantic and ended up turning around. At this point, my phone turns off and I start thinking to myself, if something happens to me here, they won't find me for days. The rest of the story is essentially just me being terrified in the woods, but I did eventually make it back to my car unscathed. Moral of the story, don't be a freaking idiot and read the trail maps thoroughly if you're gonna go hiking right before sunset. Also, charge your damn phone. Story 15. Drove to a city an hour and a half away from my small town to party with friends on a Friday night. Had to check out a club. Shouldn't work there. Went back to her place. Friends left me and drove back home. They drove back the next day to get me, but we just ended up partying again Saturday night. Woke up Saturday morning and she said she had to go to a friend's house and didn't feel comfortable leaving someone she barely knew at her house while she wasn't there. So I went with her. Pulled up to her friend's house that had a chain link fence around the front yard with a couple pit bulls running around. He let us inside and I sat in the living room while they went to the back room for a sec. Turns out he was her dealer and she was getting her next fix. While waiting, a black Cadillac Escalade pulls up and honks out front. Dude runs out there with something tucked under his shirt and they make some kind of exchange and he comes back in. Still sitting in the couch, kinda, laughing to myself because this whole situation seemed too crazy to actually be happening in my hungover or still intoxicated state. Definitely thought this day was going to turn out worse than it did. Story 16. I once came upon a bad car accident, head-on collision. One driver was more or less okay. The other had bad injuries. As I got to the car, I could see it was full of smoke and flames were coming through the dashboard. The lady was trapped as the column came in on top of her a bit, so I jumped in the back, freed her from there, and kinda handed her out the back door to some other people who just arrived to help. I was left in the car as they took her off, which was fine, as I wasn't trapped, but I sat there for just a moment longer in the burning car filled with smoke and soaked it all in as it struck me that I could have passed away here and I got out. The car flashed over shortly after and burned to a crisp. After 2 life-saving operations, the lady was okay. Scared the crap out of me. Story 17. At 17, I decided to follow my boyfriend to a city I've never been to. I'm from a fairly small town, and this was the biggest city I'd ever been to. We're bumming around, and he tells me he's met this guy who saw us and invited us to smoke with him. I'm nervous, but boyfriend says he's cool, and since young me is an idiot, I say sure and follow him. But he says he has to pick some up, so we walk to his car and I get in the back. We go to a park full of users and he's flashing a wad of cash at us and talking about how great this is, blah blah. He says he's sketchy about smoking in his car, so we're going to his place. Alarm bells are going off, but again, boyfriend seems calm, so I keep my mouth shut and try to pay attention to where we're going and how to get back downtown. Buddy's phone rings and he tells whoever that he's bringing some friends over, a guy and a young girl. So now I'm panicking, talking real fast about friends that are expecting us back and how we're traveling with these great people and just trying really hard to not look like a drifter who will be going missing without anybody noticing. We get to this building and go into his apartment, and there's a couch, and it's covered in plastic. He puts in some cheap bargain bin videos and tries to offer me a glass of beer he brought from the kitchen. I'm an idiot, but not that dumb, so I refuse. He keeps trying to separate boyfriend and I, offering to pay for some booze if boyfriend walks to the store, etc. Eventually leaves the room for a split second, and boyfriend decides it's time to steal his grass. Why? Buddy comes back and notices immediately, starts to threaten us. He's got a bat, he's making comments, etc. I just completely break down and start bawling. I'm not great in a crisis. I'm sobbing. I'm telling him I want to leave, I want to see my mom, I don't want to have intimacy with him, why can't we just leave, blah blah. He gets kind of flustered and the situation awkwardly calms down. We leave. Boyfriend and I have our first epic meltdown fight in a strange city. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 18. My ex and I broke up after 5 years together. Stupid me got more hammered than I've ever been. Drove to the spot where I proposed to her. Rock cliff thing overhanging a reservoir. Made a campfire. It was the middle of the winter and I was sitting there getting more and more hammered and certain I was going to end myself. Well, I stupidly looked over the cliff and intoxicatedly fell into the freezing winter water while it was pitch black outside. Somehow I got out and got back to the fire and quickly realized, oh yeah, it's the winter and I'm soaking wet. This is how people freeze. So I made the walk back to my truck, blasted the heater and got more intoxicated until I passed out. I woke up the next morning feeling like an idiot. I've heard a lot of stories of people getting intoxicated in the woods during the winter and freezing, which made me realize how close to passing away I was. It was weird because I wanted to end myself for weeks and weeks, but I guess I didn't want to go out that way. I don't know. Those were dark times, but I'm glad it happened. Story 19. I was at a party at the beach. Some big college party. I knew no one. My friends were elsewhere. I was making conversation with this girl who was sitting sad on the floor with a beer. It looked like she needed company. She was shaken and didn't seem to want to spare too many words. I was worried. But then this shirtless bro dude comes marching over yelling, "Hey man, you want to freaking fight? I'll beat your freaking back. All my homies will join me." Now I'm a freaking geek nerd. This guy shouldn't be threatened by me at all, but he was. One of his friends nodded his head, affirming that yes, multiple men larger than me would totally be my back. Wow, I chuckled. But one of his reasonable friends behind him gestured and said in a way that the bro couldn't hear it, "Dude, just walk away. He's out of his freaking head, just walk away. He won't do crap." I had to walk past the bro to do this, and I said to him, "That's all right, man." He just yelled, "That's right, little wuss." Later that night, after the bar crawl, guess who I see being dragged back to our hotel? It's the bro. He sauntered over to me with the help of his bros keeping him up, and he says, "Hey, man, I'm sorry about earlier. We're cool, man. You're a cool guy, man." I just say, "Yeah, we're cool, man." And I laughed at myself because, wow, he could have ended me. His bros were willing to help him do it too, and in the end, he's out of his freaking mind. Story 20. On a road trip going through a town at about midnight, some car behind us beeped us because we didn't take off the millisecond the light turned green, so we flipped them off. Bad idea. 2 users in that car. One in the passenger side window hangs out the window screaming at us. We stop at the next red light and he jumps out of his car and starts ambling towards ours. A mate is driving and starts reversing his car so he can drive away. Turns out no teeth user had a freaking metal pole concealed against his leg. He gets one heavy hit against the car before my friend steers away and drives off. They followed us for a bit until they lost interest. Flipping them off? That's like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Very unpredictable, pole-wielding bull. Story 21. I was sitting in a tram in Amsterdam and a clearly intoxicated guy sat next to me and started talking to me in a quite intense way. In a few minutes, he managed to regale me with most of his life story, including years of imprisonment and separate occasions for violent crimes. He showed me a plastic bag that contained 6 or 7 pork chops. He informed me in a hushed voice that he stole from a supermarket. I was looking forward to eating them but had no stove at his place. Did I have a stove? He knew exactly how to cook them. He wanted to share them with me. The only thing I could think of to do to stop this potentially dangerous and very insistent ex-con from following me home was to quickly jump out at a stop just before the doors closed. Shouting back I needed to get something here. I heard him say, "Wait for me." But I walked out without looking back, quickly walking past the back of the tram and heading to a canal. I quickly looked back while I was half running forward and saw the guy looking around at the stop, confused, unsteady, and clutching pork chops. I spent the next 10 minutes crisscrossing the canals and making my way to a bus to take me home. Needless to say, I shook quite a bit on the way home. Story 22. My ex-girlfriend and I were fighting. I'm pretty non-confrontational, and I was just trying to make an omelet in peace. She kept badgering me about how I was a failure, about how I wouldn't amount to anything, and that I was wasting my time with my studies. I just got accepted into an awesome DNP program. Who's wrong now? I reached my breaking point and made a single, insignificant but pointed remark about her choice of work. She's a masseuse by trade. It got quiet, and from behind me, I heard a bottle shatter on the countertop. I'm now the recipient of several large scars on my left shoulder and back. Story 23. I was rollerblading and bombed this hill. It was maybe a 60-yard path with a button hook ending. I didn't notice that at the end of the button hook were two large boulders, maybe 4 feet high and just as wide with sharp edges. Got to about 30 miles per hour before I realized there was no way I was stopping. I remember chuckling and saying, this might hurt. I had a game-time decision before I picked up any more speed and threw myself on the side of the path. Ended up rolling well past the boulders, maybe another 20 yards or so. Luckily, it was the middle of the night and the hill was grassy and well-maintained. Also, the dew helped a lot. Honestly, it felt like a slip and slide. I remember feeling as though I teleported. 1 second I was on my skates, the next I was laying on my back at the bottom of a hill. Patted myself down and I was totally fine. Wet, but fine. Story 24. I was fishing in Canada and noticed that the forest had suddenly gone very, very quiet. I was with another lad who had been kneeling down eating lunch while I fished. I turned around to move up the river and saw a cougar sitting on a rise behind us in the forest. I screamed and started trying to act as big and scary as I could while being the most afraid I've ever been in my life. It all happened in a split second, but I remember feeling absolutely helpless, knowing I couldn't reason with this wild animal. The thing gracefully just jumps into the thick of the forest, not making a sound. We were a couple hours in and had to walk out, which was the most terrifying 2 hours of my life. We did it back to back, shouting at anything to move, just knowing we were being watched. I rang Parks Canada when we got back into reception range, and the lady just said, "You're lucky. I've never heard of someone seeing a cougar before it attacked." Story 25. Fast Eddie. Fast Eddie was a local who was completely harmless and sober and even pretty freaking funny. When he got intoxicated, however, it was a completely different story. I'm a Mountie, and decades ago I was stationed to a remote northern Canadian detachment where the only access was flight. The reserve there that we policed was big, and there were only 3 of us, so you had to become friends with the locals or you would probably end up gone. One day he got really intoxicated and called us and said he had a weapon with hostages. He lived in a very remote location, and we knew he lived alone and knew it was unlikely that he did in fact have anyone else in the house, but nonetheless, we had to act. So the 3 of us set up a perimeter around his house and did our best to negotiate. There were no hostages, and Fast Eddie passed out. But the sound of our police pickup trucks woke him up, and he was grouchy at being woken, so he decided to scare us away with a weapon. He said he was aiming at the trucks, but I felt that bullet zip by my ear and strike the lamppost behind me. That was the closest I've been to being ended in my career. So far. He was arrested and charged without further incident, which resulted in some probation. Despite almost being ended by him, I loved Fast Eddie. He lived a hard life and was coping with it the best he could. When he was sober, he was probably one of the funniest people I've ever met. Rest in peace, buddy. Story 26. Snowboarding in Colorado. Took a spill into a tree well of a large Douglas fir. Where I had fallen, you couldn't see me even if you were riding about 10 feet from me, since I sunk about 4 feet below the level of the snow upon falling in and was stuck in a bowl-shaped depression in immediate proximity to the tree. Decided to unstrap my board and reverse the orientation of my body so I was facing out of the well, only to sink more. I remember it so vividly, being like quicksand, but worse. Any tiny movement of my body and I would sink a few inches. I ended up being in deep snow with my head approximately 4 feet below the level of the glades, running around 5 feet away. I sat there still until someone rode close enough for them to hear me yell. Totally understandable how people pass away in those things. Story 27. My friend, his girlfriend, and I were at the bar getting angry when the girlfriend overheard a couple of large men fighting. She decides it's her responsibility to stop their fight and inserts herself into the fray. The large men stop fighting each other and begin to pester her. She doesn't leave the situation because she's intoxicated and stupid, so it escalates to the point where we have to intervene. These guys are a good head and shoulders taller than me, and I'm a good foot taller than my friend, so I'm thinking we are definitely going to get manhandled in this situation. Girlie goes and sits down now that she's caused such commotion, and the large men start swinging at us. Luckily, I knew the bouncer, and he saw everything and helped us send the guys packing. But we took a couple punches because my friend's girlfriend is an antagonizing witch. Story 28. I was alone on a train from Zurich to Paris. I had a window seat, and a huge, muscly, huge man came and sat next to me. And then he started crying and shouting and punching the seat in front of him. I was quite convinced he was going to start punching me instead at any moment. He was not really on this planet and obviously really hurting about something. Sometimes he'd go quiet and I'd relax and start to feel better about the next 3 hours. But then he'd suddenly clap his hands together really loudly, making me jump out of my skin and go back to crying and punching the seat. It was quite distressing. At one point he got up and went away. I thought I was safe, but instead he came back with a croissant and angrily ate it while crying. Now I had crumbs to contend with, too. The second time he got up to look for more pastry, two lovely girls motioned for me to come and sit with them on their table seats. I did and thanked them in my terrible French. He came back, sat down, and went back to crying and punching the seat, but he was at least away from me. Then, two horrible American boys got on at a station. They were playing music from a phone, so I already hated them. They saw the empty seat next to me and the empty seat next to the angry, crying man, and they asked him if he'd mind sitting next to me so they could sit together. Obviously, he obliged, and I got to spend the next hour jumping out of my skin as he started bashing at the table instead. I didn't pass away, but that put me off train level in Europe for a while. Story 29. Friend's stag party. Ended with us camping out in the desert. I woke up to mooing and a cow with two much smaller baby cows near our campsite. Having had interaction with cows before, I thought I could just walk up and start petting. As I'm walking towards the cows, I realize a few things. We aren't near a farm or anything. These are likely some wild cows whose ancestors escaped domestication a while ago. And more importantly, number 2, cows, even female cows, have horns. As soon as I was maybe 30 to 40 feet from the cows, she lowered her head at me like a bull does right before they charge. I'm sure her motherly instinct was kicking in or something. I just turned around and laughed at how stupid I was just about to be, thinking I could walk up to a wild horned animal and just, pet it. As soon as I backed off, she and the little baby cows just wandered off and continued eating whatever they could find in the desert. Story 30. After my freshman year in college, I was fording a river on a solo hiking trip that seemed only 2 feet at its steepest point. Nope. Halfway across, I'm waist deep and the current is so strong that it knocks my hiking sandals clean off my feet, and the only thing stopping me from being flown down the river was my hiking stick and both feet firmly planted against the current. I knew that if I tried to turn around, I'd be swept away. And if I took a step forward, it'd have the same outcome. I had that self-chuckle, holy crap, moment. But then decided to take off my pack and throw it as far as I could towards the bank and make a go at it. Threw it, missed the bank, jumped, ended up finally grabbing onto the rocky bank 100 meters downriver after a sickening battle with the rapids. That was stupid, but at least it got my heart moving. Story 31. I was working in my associates in a small village in another city. I arrived in the country at 8 p.m. Buses to the village and at 6 p.m. I got stuck. So I went to a hotel, right? No. I just started walking to the village, 1 hour drive away with gigantic bags, in the dark. Then 3 people in a car approached me and offered to take me there if I paid them gas money. Sure, why not? We got to a gas station and I gave them some money, and they surprisingly actually took me to the village and everything went fine. Story 32. I'm Hispanic, but pretty light-skinned so I can pass for white. Anyways, I'm in college in North Texas about a decade ago, and we were at a house party in the middle of winter. There was this guy there who looked friendly enough. A big guy with a shaved head and tats, most of which were covered up by a long-sleeved shirt. At some point late in the evening, the conversation turned to substances. He mentioned that he knew where he could get some, so everyone pitched in and nominated me to go with him and pick up. I get in his car and he drives me to a part of town I'm not familiar with, all the while boasting that he could get me any stuff I wanted. We arrive at this fairly large house in a dark street and go in. There's a group of about 6 other guys and a couple of girls. They seem friendly and immediately offer me a bowl to smoke while I wait for the stuff. As I'm sitting there, I look around and realize all the dudes had the same basic look. White guys with shaved heads, lots of tats. That's when I look up and notice the big flag hanging on the wall. I kept telling myself, keep it cool, they think you're white. Be cool, don't act Latino, don't act Latino. We completed the pickup and he drove me back to the party, but for a moment, there I was, definitely like, oh crap, I'm in danger. Story 33. Oh, I've got one. Marching band camp, sophomore year. I decided to sprint full speed across the parking lot while pulling the very heavy water cart. I remember thinking how fun it was, then wondering how I was going to stop the car mid-sprint. Literally laughed to myself, going full speed, and thought about how dangerous and stupid the thing I was doing was and how there was no way it could end well. I didn't have to stop it, as it hit my heel and I went tumbling. The cart kept rolling and almost took out a few flutes. One surgery later, I now have a metal plate and 6 screws in my left shoulder. Marching band is no joke, kids. Story 34. It's how I woke up one morning feeling kind of empty, like if I'd lost more energy than usual. I slept my usual 8 hours, so it was a bit weird. Can't be the kidney stone I had a week earlier. Never heard of it being a side effect. I went to the bathroom feeling unwell and started retching. I thought, like an idiot. Guess I need more sleep. I fed the cats and went back to sleep, thinking I just needed a power nap of some sort to feel refreshed. An hour later, I woke up sweating like a beast and even more empty in terms of energy than before. I tried to get up, but it felt like I could faint just from walking. My roommate had already left for work, so I had no one to rely on. I dragged myself once more to the bathroom and felt like I was in a volcano. I was able to draw myself a really low amount of water in the bath and climb in just to try and reduce my temperature. As I got in, I felt a tad better, but I had no energy left and felt myself lose consciousness. My God, I'm gonna pass away in this bathtub. Luckily, I regained consciousness not long after and called the ambulance. Like an idiot, instead of waiting for them, I got dressed and limped to the lobby of my building because I did not want to be a nuisance to them and make them work harder by climbing to the third floor. The EMT thought it might be okay since I walked by myself until I started retching again in front of him. Turns out, the anti-inflammatory they gave me for the kidney stone was something my stomach didn't like, so I developed a big ulcer that burst inside. Stayed a week at the ICU because I lost too much. Scariest crap to date in my life. Story 35. I was the night shift manager at Schlotsky's Deli. I worked with two other people, one a really good friend and the other a new guy who was about 4 inches taller than me and had a record. Spent a lot of the shift talking to his baby mama on the phone at the front of the store, which anyone in the dining room could hear. When he started yelling and screaming, I told him to cut it out and that he couldn't spend a shift on the phone. I had to tell him a couple times to get off the phone, and the third time he said, "Oh yeah? What are you going to do about it?" And I said, "Well, I'll just issue a report with the boss." To which he replied, "And what's to stop me from knocking the crap out of you?" I honestly looked at him and said, nothing is. And we stared at each other. Fortunately, my coworker said, "What's stopping you is if you do it, I'm calling the police and your back is going back to jail." He ended up getting fired for threatening manager, but I didn't get punched, which was nice. Story 36. Lived in Rochester for university. Terrible snowy winters, driving through an intersection in a 95 LeBaron. Lost all control and traction, just spinning in circles through traffic. My friend and I just laughed as he said, "You ready?" Meaning, "Are you prepared for the end?" Responded with, "I'm with you." There was a complete lack of control in the situation where everything was up to the universe, fate, chance, etc. Where you just sit back and let it play out. Didn't even turn the music down. Needless to say, we eventually missed all cars and several poles and came to a stop in an empty mall parking lot. No harm and kept going. We were going to Walmart. Story 37. On a 14,000-foot glacier in the Italian Alps, I just wanted to peek around the corner of a prominence, and I wanted to see if I could get down a bit to take a good picture. Then the screen slid out from under me, and I was stuck in the face too far from anyone else, and I knew I couldn't use the gondola to get down. I did a controlled slide to a lower point that just got me in further trouble, and I knew my life was in danger. For 10 minutes, I hung there trying to figure out what to do. Finally, I spotted a rotting timber stuck in the ice, 40 feet below at an angle. I decided if I could get to it before my feet slid out, I could hang there until they found me. I leapt, scrambling across the face of a mini avalanche as I fell at an angle. I reached the board and I held on tight, but it came out of the ground and I started falling down the mountain. So I shoved the board under me and rode it down the glacier for nearly half a mile like a goddamn cartoon character. Somehow it worked. It deposited me in a talus field and I hiked back to the refugio in time to see the Alpini mustering in the square to rescue me. They yelled at me something fierce, telling me how many people passed away in the mountain and how I could have vanished in a crevasse, never to be seen again. Then everyone forgave me and my uncle got me shots of grappa for my heroics. I was 19 and insanely reckless. That was 30 years ago. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.